Life Audio.
Welcome to this Christmas episode of the Teamless Podcast, where we share how grace, commitment, and cooperation can help couples live the everyday moments of marriage together. Hey everyone, we're Ted.
And Ashley Slater. We don't have to be Scrooges to benefit from reflecting on Christmas past, present, and future. Today we talk about how looking back, living now, and planning ahead together can enrich our marriages. So I learned an interesting Christmas marriage fact recently.
Oh, I love interesting Christmas marriage facts.
So apparently back in the 18th and 19th centuries, there were a lot of Christmas Day weddings.
Okay, like where? Like in Europe, Americas?
That's a good question. Okay. I'm guessing in Europe.
Okay.
Apparently I didn't do my research well enough because I didn't expect that question.
Okay.
But Christmas Day...
Why would that be?
Well, Christmas Day weddings usually happened out of necessity. It wasn't like this romanticized festive thing.
Oh.
I was doing a little research.
Okay.
And according to a site called Find My Past, Christmas and Boxing Day were often the only days of the year that young working class couples were guaranteed to get off work. Even Charles Dickens, Ebenezer Scrooge, was forced to reluctantly give his long-suffering clerk, Bob Cratchit, the day off in the opening chapter of A Christmas Carol.
Yeah, interesting. I know Boxing Day is a thing. I thought it was only Canada, but that's a Europe thing as well, like a UK.
I don't know.
See,
you're asking me all these questions that I don't know. I'm going to have to go back and read.
I think our listeners are probably going to do some research too.
Yeah, and America is much younger than Europe, so maybe this is Europe.
Not according to our Native American brothers and sisters.
Yes, you're right.
I'm a jerk.
Wow,
going.
I feel really...
Keep going.
You're just trying to throw me off today.
No,
All right. Well, this article said that in the 1800s, most people worked 6 days a week, and they didn't get vacation days back then. So if they took a day off, they didn't get paid, and most people couldn't afford to do that. So it wasn't until improved working conditions and employee rights also improved with trade unions that in the 20th century, this tradition became less common. That's interesting, right?
It is. Christmas is multifaceted celebration, day of celebration.
Yes, and once we're done recording, I will go reread those articles in full and let you know if it was Europe, America, where this was.
Oh, that's cool.
Where this was happening. Okay, so we didn't get married on Christmas Day, but it was pretty close.
Very close, yep.
So December 21st. And looking back, I mean, I guess it was kind of getting married over the holidays was somewhat of a necessity for us.
We had the week free, right? It was between semesters.
Right. Like, I still remember our date-picking conversation.
Right.
We got engaged in August, and I think you originally wanted to get married around Valentine's Day.
Right. But we didn't have, like, a big days off then for you to be able to do that, right?
Right. I was in grad school at the time. And full-time. Right. And I wanted to get married over the breaks. So we talked about either waiting until the following summer.
You just couldn't. You were like so into me. You're like, no, I can't wait that long. I must taste your lips.
Or being adventurous and planning a wedding in like 3 months, which is what we ended up doing.
Yep. 3 months.
Well, today we are talking about how we don't have to be Scrooges to benefit from reflecting on Christmas past, present, and future. So after a short break, we'll talk about how looking back, living now, and planning ahead can benefit our marriages. So today we're talking about how looking at Christmas's past, present, and future, you know, kind of like Scrooge did, as a couple can enrich our relationships. So let's talk about looking back first.
I'm looking forward to it.
Nicely done. There you go. So nostalgia often happens when we look back, especially at the holidays. And I have to put a little tangent in here that's not in my script.
Okay.
Which is whenever I think of nostalgia now, I think of Inside Out 2, how all the emotions are in her head and nostalgia comes in and they said, no, we're not ready for you yet. And she has to leave because Riley's not old enough for nostalgia.
That's
yet.
funny.
I am definitely old enough for nostalgia.
Nah, me too.
But I read an article on nostalgia, which I'll include a link to in the show notes. And in it, the author explains that the term nostalgia was coined back in the 17th century by Johannes Hofer, who published a paper on it. So do you know what, like, the word means broken down?
You know, it's fascinating because I have no idea. Usually I'd be able to figure something out, but nostalgia. I have no idea.
Really? Because you're normally good at this.
I know, but it's like I don't see any Latin sort of roots in that word, nostalgia. No, what does it mean?
Okay, well, it's a combining of two Greek words.
Greek.
Nostis and algos.
Okay. I know nostis like from agnostic, right?
Well, I guess in English it translates to homecoming and pain.
Pain and homecoming?
Yeah, and according to Hoffer, nostalgia was a physical condition that showed itself as a debilitating homesickness.
Oof.
But with time, it became more of like a psychological disorder that kept people stuck, like instead of, stuck in the past, instead of flourishing in the here and now.
Wow.
So it seems like it was more of a negative concept. Mm-hmm. But in my reading, I found that that's no longer the case. Right.
It's sort of a wistful recollection of good experiences that tugs at your heart. Right? Isn't that
right?
Kind of
that's what I think of.
Yeah.
Okay, so I read an interview that the American Psychological Association did with Dr. Christine Bacho, who's a nostalgia expert.
Wow.
And she shared that holiday reminiscing can have psychological benefits. Yeah, she found in her research that nostalgic reminiscing, it can help us maintain a sense of continuity as things continue to change with time. It can be reassuring because it helps us realize how much joy, hard work, success, and excitement we've experienced in our lives. Mm-hmm. And it can help us even when things are difficult because looking back at the past reminds us that we've survived and come through things before and we can do that again.
So are we looking back, like we've been married 20-something years, so are we looking back at our Christmas celebrations with nostalgia, or when we were kids and growing up with our families as younger kids, the nostalgia of those Christmases, or what are we doing?
Well, I think as couples, we can look back or get nostalgic about Christmases we spent together because it's an opportunity for us to remember and reflect on like shared history and shared memories, be grateful for joy we've experienced through the holidays or how God has brought us through pain hand in hand.
We've got some great experiences, Christmas experiences.
Yeah. For us personally, it could be because we got married right around Christmas. It could be looking back and watching our wedding video or looking at we spent our first married Christmas Eve at Notre Dame in Paris at a Christmas Eve service. And you were like falling asleep standing up.
I was so tired.
And so it's fun to think back and kind of giggle at that.
Right. And then we've had some experiences picking out a tree in the snow and dragging it home and putting it up.
Right.
With the family.
Yeah. So, we can look back at those things that we've experienced together. And I think in some ways it can bring renewed or refreshed is not the right word, joy to this Christmas season. Because we look back and go, oh, that was fun. Or we did this one year. Maybe we should do something similar to that this year.
And maybe someday this Christmas's memories will be nostalgic.
Yeah, that's crazy to think about, right? It's
crazy to think about it, yeah.
We've spent Christmases where we went to magical dinners.
Oh, man, in a
And when
castle.
I say Christmas, I'm thinking Christmas season. Not just Christmas Eve and Christmas Day.
Right.
But we've also had harder Christmases, like the year when you were in Chicago and we were in Colorado
Trying
and
to
we
sell the
were
house and I was
right.
working.
You were working in the beginning, probably beginning of December, and then we were packing up and moving to Chicago in the middle of the winter. Right. So, that was a harder Christmas, but look at us. It's how old's our youngest Dorothy? She's 13. That was over 13 years ago, maybe 14 years ago.
Right.
And here we are. We're still walking through life hand in hand. So I think that there's power in, as a couple, looking back at your shared Christmases and reminiscing about those.
Yes, and amen.
You can see I was waiting for a response. So in addition to looking back, we can also be living now in the present as we celebrate Christmas.
Okay.
And living in the present in any time of the year, I think, is always the hardest for me. I have a hard time being present because I'm often...
You're such a good planner.
Yeah, I like to plan ahead. I like to anticipate and look forward to things. And sometimes I spend too much time. Also, I can get stuck reflecting on the past and trying to work out things that haven't made sense to me, or you know what I mean?
Yeah, there's a lot that doesn't make sense.
So, but as couples, I think that one of the benefits of living in the present is that we're able to give each other in the moment our full attention. When we're in the present, we cannot be distracted by what happened last year or what we plan to do next week.
That's super important.
Right. Yeah. And I actually looked up some practical ways we can be present during the holiday season and beyond.
Okay, let's hear these practical ways.
So, one, put the phone away. Now, for us, you're looking at me like, what? Now, for us,
my precious.
And you're on call pretty much 24/7 with your clients. So you need to have your phone nearby. But say we're in the living room admiring the Christmas tree and listening to Christmas music together. Your phone could be in the kitchen with the ringer on.
Yeah.
And then you can still get
practical.
it if someone's needs to contact you, but it's not right there to grab when maybe we hit a moment of silence or, I don't know, you get bored.
That's really practical. That's super. What else you got?
Okay. Practice active listening. That's another way to be present.
Yes. So what I'm hearing you say is I should actively listen.
Yes. Yeah. And an article from the Harvard Business Review by Amy Gallo defines active listening as when you not only hear what someone is saying, but also attune to their thoughts and feelings. It turns a conversation into an active, non-competitive, two-way interaction.
Right. Yeah, I think it can get kind of easy to be in a conversation where you're listening, but also formulating what you're going to say in response rather than being fully present and listening.
Right. Yeah.
So that's what I'm hearing you say there.
Yeah, it's very nicely done there. So the article, which I will add a link to in the show notes, it offers some practical ideas on how to be an active listener in addition to what you were doing, which was kind of reflecting. Right. Isn't that what that's called?
Yeah.
Where you listen and you repeat to make sure that you're understanding what the other person.
Active listening process. It can be a part of the active listening process, I think.
Well, and I actually had that in my notes later. So you just beat me to it.
Yes. Well, we shall repeat.
Okay. So some practical ideas that were in this article is one, to understand your default listening style. And I thought that was really interesting. Like I said, I'll have a link in the show notes. Apparently there's a task-oriented listener, an analytical listener, a relational listener, and a critical listener. And so if we kind of understand how we tend to listen, that's helpful to us.
What would you say I am?
Oh, you're either a analytical listener or a critical listener, I think.
Okay.
That's what I would say.
Okay.
We can go look at the descriptions.
Yeah, and that affects the conversation, I suppose, if you know what you tend to listen like.
Or maybe it just helps you also be aware of how you're listening. Because maybe you know you're a analytical listener, but what the person you're talking to needs is a relational
listener.
Right.
Okay.
And yeah, in this article, there is a description of what each of those are. Okay, so another thing you can do is make an active, conscious choice about how to best listen. And this can mean asking yourself things like, why do I need to listen right now? What is the focus of attention in this conversation? Why am I talking?
Why am I talking?
Am I still listening? What am I missing? So those are two things, the default listening style and the active conscious choice about how to best listen from that article that I thought were really helpful.
So I'm imagining we're having a conversation. You're talking and I'm like, why am I talking? Why am I still listening? What am I missing? And you're still talking. And I'm like, what is the focus of attention in this conversation?
Yeah, but it's not why am I still listening? It's am I still listening? Meaning, am I still listening?
Or have I zoned out?
Yes. Am I thinking about what I'm making for dinner? Since you tend to cook more, or...
You're cooking tonight, though, babe.
I am. I'm making some Japanese pork buns.
Oh, so tasty.
Yeah, we like to make those over the holiday season. So I think active listening can also include, and here's where my notes overlap what you said, restating what we've heard to make sure we understand what's really being shared. And I think it also can include asking questions and being curious. As long as we don't derail what the person is talking about, we let them kind of finish their train of thought, you know?
Right. I think that's super helpful. It can feel forced or can feel sort of like an artificial kind of thing you're doing. What I hear you say is yada, yada. But it is helpful because it confirms to you that I've heard you.
Right. And maybe you don't have to...
I've heard you right.
Maybe you don't have to state it that way. So what I hear you saying is it could be...
So what I'm hearing you say is I don't need to start off with what I'm hearing you say.
I'm at a loss to figure out how to restate it right now. But there's probably a more subtle way to... Or, oh, that sounds really tough that you were frustrated with such and such. Sure. And then the person has a chance to clarify and say, well, no, that's not really what I was frustrated with. You know what I mean? And then it sounds like you're being empathetic, but you're also giving them an opportunity to clarify.
Yeah. Active listening.
Exactly.
Very good.
Okay. So an example of how you could do this over the holidays or over Christmas is ask each other what we're enjoying the most about the holiday season, and then taking that and maybe doing an activity. It's very vague. Maybe I'm like, I'm loving making cookies this Christmas.
Okay.
And you're like, great. I'd love to taste each of them. Or I don't know. I don't know. We're still working on this one, folks.
Is this going to be the Us Time Challenge?
You'll find out what the Us Time Challenge is.
Ooh.
Okay, so we're going to take another break. When we come back, we'll talk about planning ahead. We are talking about the benefits of looking back, living now, and planning ahead as a couple, or Christmas past, present, and future, since this is our Christmas episode.
Ooh, I was going to say ghostly, but it's not ghostly. Spiritual? I don't know. I got nothing. No jokes here.
So we've already talked about looking back and living now. So let's talk about planning ahead. So I read an article on Psychology Today by Barton Goldsmith. I've obviously read a lot of articles for this particular episode. A lot of
research.
But not enough on what countries got married on Christmas Day.
You can't know everything, right?
Right. Okay. So he had this to say. One thing that successful relationships all have in common is that the couples in them make plans for the future, both near and long term. Making plans builds a bond and a stronger sense of security in our hearts. And he goes on to be very practical and saying planning for the future with your partner is not hard at all once you begin. You might start by picturing yourselves living together well into your golden years and talk about what life will be like for the two of you. Sometimes you can see your own future by just looking out your front door.
That is interesting. We both got grandparents that are getting older. And so we can sort of envision what our lives might be like, sort of looking at them and putting ourselves in their shoes and what would we.
Right. Well, neither of us have living grandparents anymore.
Grandparents, right.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I think the holiday season, especially as we head into the new year, is a time we find ourselves naturally thinking about the future. What's next? What's next year going to look like? And I think for us, when it comes to planning ahead, we've realized we want to sit down and plan together when it comes to our LLC, because we've just kind of been going along and doing what's next when it comes to work. We haven't sat down and... Yeah, it's exciting and daunting, though, to sit down and, write down our goals specifically for, the company or what we want it to look like.
You might need help with that.
Yeah, that's true. Okay. Well, that's one thing we want to plan ahead in. But I think that planning ahead just isn't just our shared goals for where we want to be financially or career-wise or with our kids when we get to this time next year. It can also include relational goals. Like maybe we want to be more consistent with date nights. It's been a very busy fall. And I think we fell out of the consistency we'd established earlier in the year. So,
definitely, sure.
Yeah. So I think...
I like going on date nights with you.
I know. We need to get back into doing it regularly. Yeah. We've gone on one this month, maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's been busy. There was a lot of travel. So I think, those listening can sit down and be like, okay, what's one relational goal by next Christmas we have for our relationship? Maybe it's more date nights I remembered. Or maybe we want to laugh more together.
Okay.
Or communicate better, or understand each other's love languages. Right.
Once you have those ideas in mind, you can put together a plan to get there.
Yeah. And then just think, next Christmas, you'll be looking back and be like, look how far we came. Remember? Right.
Yeah, that's good.
So to recap, this Christmas season, actively seek out ways to look back, live now, and plan ahead with your spouse. We're going to take one more break. When we return, we'll be back with this week's Us Time Challenge. For this week's Us Time Challenge, practice nostalgia with your spouse. Ask each other about your favorite Christmas you've spent together and why it stands out to you. I thought that might be the easiest one.
Sure. And I suppose if you're a younger couple, what are we asking them to do? Same thing or go back into childhood?
That's a really great question. Okay, so maybe if you've been married
for 5
longer.
Years, 5 years or more.
like we have, you do the nostalgia.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe if you're newly married, you do the look ahead,
That's
the plan ahead, and figure out, okay, what do we want this next Christmas to look like? Or where do we want to be as a couple when we get to next Christmas?
That's very good.
Well, thanks for joining us on the Team Us podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to the podcast, and we'd love to have you leave a review over at Apple Podcasts. We're looking forward to next time as we keep talking about how grace, commitment, and cooperation can help couples live the everyday moments of marriage together.
Team Us with Ted and Ashley Slater is a production of Life Audio and Salem Media. If you liked what you heard today, please take a second to rate and review the podcast in your favorite podcast app so that more listeners like you can find the show. For more faith-filled, inspirational podcasts, visit us at lifeaudio.com.
You're fearfully and wonderfully made. God looks at your heart, not your jean size. Do you know the verses, yet still stress over your body? Oh, I get it. I was raised in church, but I struggled with food, eating disorders, and my body for decades. I'm Heather Creekmore, host of the Compared to You podcast, where we talk about all things body image and comparison from a biblical perspective. We get real about the pressure to focus on appearance in a culture where looks seem to matter most. Whether you're wrestling wrinkles or battling the scale, Compared to Who is the show for you. You'll laugh a little and be encouraged a lot. If you're ready to stop comparing and start living, visit lifeaudio.com to listen and subscribe.